Mrs. Rigby,
Here.
and Mr. Valentine.
Here. Mrs. Gillis is not able to be with us tonight. Pledge of Allegiance. Mrs. Rigby, will you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approval of the regular meeting minutes for the July 8th, 2024 meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Rigby. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. De Silva. Questions or comments? There being none, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Messig,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 4-0. Approval of the agenda for this evening's meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, let's go. Moved by Mrs. Messick, second by Mrs. De Silva, please. Call the roll.
Mrs. Messig,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 4-0. Moving on to presentations, Dr. Marshausen.
We have been working for several months with Planning Next in our focus group work to gather information on how we're going to deal with increasing high school enrollment. And at this point, I would like to invite Sarah to the podium from Planning Next to share the results from that focus group work as we continue to work through this challenge.
Yeah, I see it. There we go. Am I live? Okay. Great. Well, thanks for having me tonight. My name is Sarah Bonjour. I'm a director with Planning Next. We're a community planning firm based here in Columbus. And let's see. Okay. So as John said, I'm going to present tonight what we heard from our focus group work back in May. And I think just as a level set, I think you know this. This is why we're here talking about it. But the school system is projecting a 2,000 member student increase in the 9 through 12, specifically cohort, in the next 10 years. That's a 33% increase. And so now's the time to start thinking about how to accommodate that growth. The existing buildings will be significantly above the recommended capacity according to the Ohio Schools Commission, which sets guidelines for that. And we know that Dublin sits within a rapidly growing central Ohio region, so we don't, projections are just projections, but we don't see any reason why that would change. So now, again, is the time to be thinking and planning. So who we engaged, in mid-May, we worked to convene 23 focus groups across 2 weeks. Again, this was focused on the future of the high school specifically. We engaged over 180 stakeholders. And they provided insight and really good feedback on options to really ensure that the school district understands the perspective of many different people affected by the decision. Again, I want to stress, though, that this is qualitative research. That's not a statistically valid sample or interest of the entire district. But when I advance here to the groups, sorry, that's really small on the screen, but we do feel like we got a good cross-section, from talking to representatives of the city and the business community, to staff and leadership at the school district, to the feeder parents for each of the high schools, students, alumni. So we've really felt like we got a good broad perspective. So what we shared, there were some materials that were given out at each of the focus groups. One we call the placemat, that's in the bottom left corner there. It was 11 by 17, and it outlined the 6 different options for how the school district could accommodate this growth. We also handed out a FAQ document, which had some good information about the current size of the school facilities, the projected growth, and some other FAQs. And we also had to know the facts, which again had some more financial data and some other things just as base information for folks as they participated in the focus groups. So the options presented, I'm going to just hit these at a high level, but if you have questions, please feel free to stop me or ask more questions about them. But basically 6 options were presented, 4 of which we considered more of a traditional high school approach. The other 2 were a little bit different. But the first one was to construct a 4th high school on land that the school district would purchase somewhere in the district. The second option was to construct a 4th high school on district-owned land at Mitchell DeWitt Road, which the school district already owns. The third option was to purchase the Cardinal Health West campus, and convert it into a 4th high school. The fourth option was to add on to the Scioto High School and have the 3 existing high schools all become 3 larger high schools, and then purchase the 5th option was to purchase Cardinal Health West Campus and convert it to a freshman building. So this is where it starts maybe the more non-traditional approaches, but to really peel off that freshman group and put them in the Cardinal Health West Campus. And then a 6th option was, again, to purchase the Cardinal Health West campus and convert it into an early college campus-focused building. So we presented these. We asked folks if they had any, questions, anything that would help them to understand these in more detail. We did use live polling, Mentimeter. We were able to get really quickly just a gut reaction to these as presented. We know there was a lot of questions about, we didn't have all the answers yet, but we're trying to at least get some gut reaction to these, which we did. And then we also had a sheet, corresponding recording sheet, where we were really interested in what folks, why they rated them a certain way. So we were asking for some additional information from them. We then got into a discussion with folks, and so we could learn a little bit more about how they rated the different options. So we did that in about an hour, which is each of the groups. And then what we heard, really the key takeaways, were, as we aggregated all of the groups' information together and feedback, was that there is significant apprehension for another levy in the community. There was also just a recognition that more data was needed. People recognized we gave them some cost data on that placemat about initial construction costs, that kind of thing, but we know there's ongoing operational and maintenance costs and things like that. There were redistricting concerns, and one of the things that we sort of level set with them is that any of these options is going to require redistricting, so that is kind of across the table something that will have to be addressed. Equally, the location of where this new capacity was almost as important as what was done. I mean, people really cared about the geography and thinking about where the schools were distributed, and so there was some discussion around that. There was talk around and recognition that whatever is done, that this should really there's an opportunity to strengthen the unity within the school system. There was questions about what is enough. We don't want to be in a Band-Aid solution kind of thing. People were concerned, like, if we do one of these solutions, will we still be back here having the same conversation in 5 years? So there was some talks about that. We understand from talking to them that the school spirit and attachment to the school community is really strong in Dublin. And so they wanted to make sure, I think that's a sort of an underpinning and making sure that that's still, a value here. Whatever happens, messaging is really key, making sure that folks understand the different components and the different things that are going into these decisions. But the groups generally were accepting of the need for additional capacity. People see the growth. They understand that the schools are reacting to what's happening in the larger community. And so there was that understanding. And I think also on the similar lines is people really appreciate the value of the schools and understand the quality of life that they have in Dublin, and the schools play a central part to that. So they wanted to make sure that, whatever decisions made, that the schools are still going to be successful in the future. So after we had the discussion and we had them, give us like a rating on 1 to 5 of which ones they felt like be the best option for the future of the Dublin schools. Again, these are just focus group results, not community-wide results, but 2 options sort of rose to the top, which was option 3, which was purchase the Cardinal Health West campus and convert it into that 4th high school. That would mean you'd have to add a gym, a field, stadium. The redistricting would be needed, and there would be some new levy to cover some of that construction cost. Option 4 was to add on to the Scioto High School and just have 3 larger high schools. This would mean maintaining the 3, kind of traditional high schools with 2,100 to 2,500 students. Again, redistricting would need to happen. This one could happen, though, with no or a smaller levy required. So that's what, after we aggregated all the focus groups, this is what kind of lifted out as the top options. So our next steps moving forward is that we're looking to launch a survey, a broad survey, the first week of September. We're going to administer this survey in 2 different ways. One would be the statistically valid survey route, which I understand the school district does this annual survey, so that will kind of plug into that. And then we also want to give folks an opportunity through self-selected qualitative. We'll push it out through the channels that the school district uses to message out to the community, so anyone can partake in the survey and give their feedback. The purpose of the survey is to educate the community on the issue and the presented solutions, and then understand better how this community wants to solve for the high school capacity that's needed in the future. Our timing is that by the end of September, we should have the survey results analyzed. And then understand the staff's working on some better cost information, kind of tightening that up. So we should have some final direction by end of the calendar year. Any questions? I think that's my last, whoops, let me go back. Last slide there. I know I went through that kind of quickly, but if you have any questions or anything else you'd like to know, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have one question about
Yep.
the resources that were shared
Yeah.
with the groups. Was the frequently asked questions, were they shared at the beginning, or were they gathered in the middle of the process, or where did those come from?
Yeah, no, we anticipated some of the questions, so we had an initial version, and then we did update that because we realized that for their first day of focus groups that there was some questions from folks about the current school enrollment, so we did add to it and issue another one, but yeah, we provided it ahead of time so people could kind of, and we provided the material so people could kind of get their head into it and kind of understand it, yeah.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
One is kind of back to the 6 options and the
Yeah.
drawing board, and as it relates to geography.
Yeah.
My question is, did you get a sense if the groups preferred a building where the growth is, or a balance of buildings across the district in terms of serving the students?
Yeah, we heard both, honestly. We heard some folks really felt strongly that the solution should kind of cover where the growth is happening. There was also discussion about balance because of sort of currently with this campus and Double Cop, like how things are, they were worried about the Cardinal West building kind of being too much together, for traffic and things like that. So there was some discussion about that. I think we saw both sides of the perspective, though. Some people said, well, yeah, it has a crunch time during drop-off and pickup time, but the rest of the day, it wouldn't impact necessarily traffic. It really had the traffic conversation, and transportation was sort of one piece of it. And then there was the other piece about trying to locate the growth locate the new capacity where the growth was happening. So we did hear both, and I'm not sure, honestly, I can't say that one kind of outweighed the other. I feel like we just heard a lot about geography. People really cared about where it was where the capacity was going to come.
Okay, thank you. And my other question was the September surveys.
Yeah.
I just want to be sure, are those 2 options, the ones that rose to the top, are those going to be the only ones presented in those surveys in September?
I'm looking at John because we had submitted some questions to Paul, and I think we're still getting coordinated on that, so I don't want to misspeak, but.
Yeah, we work with Paul Fallon, and Paul's going to help us. I have a call with him later this week to talk about what would be statistically valid and what would give us the most useful information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any additional questions? All right.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Toll's Career and Technical Center update?
You have in the agenda is a copy of a report from Tolles. I did not see, or we did not hear back from Mr. Melody, so you have that attached.
Anything additional? All right, moving on to public participation. For action items on the agenda, nobody has signed up this evening. Board President, Board of Education comments. Any committee reports before we move on to our student representative? All right. Is there anything that you would like to report as our student representative? And I also should say, why don't you introduce yourself as well,
Okay.
please?
Is this on? Okay. Good evening. I'm Kenny McKell, and I'm so excited to be representing Jerome this school year. All three high schools' fall athletics are in full swing after August 1st tryouts. The Irish Festival was a success as always, as volunteers from all three high schools gathered to ensure a great outcome. August 8th was freshman orientation for all schools, and the freshmen were able to tour the building and get a feel for how high school will go. Athletes are enjoying the new turf at Jerome and Scioto, and happy 20 years since Jerome's opening. So that's all I have to report. Thank you.
Any questions for one of our new student representatives? Thank you. Moving on to report and action items from the superintendent's office.
Thank you. As I get started today, thanks for Mrs. Messick, Mrs. DeSilva, and Mrs. Rigby for joining us today at our convocations. It was great that you were able to bounce around to all three buildings. Also, thanks to Jen, my co-presenter, and to Keeper and Grady for all of the organization that went into pulling off three convocations this morning. I think we were well received. So Jen and I talked. I don't know if it's because of the content or because it was short, but either one, we're off and running, and great to see everybody together, the school spirit. Thanks to Spear Mechanical, because it is fun when everybody's in their Dublin Think Team shirts. If you want to see them, Mrs. O'Connor's modeling one in the back. So if you, Donna's got on the shirt, and Donna, thank you for all your help, and I think you made it to all three today too. So we're off and running and excited about that. As Sarah mentioned, one of the options we've talked about is planning next, but we've hit a little bump in the road when it comes to the Cardinal Health facility. Last Thursday, Mr. Stark and I went for a preliminary hearing before the Dublin Planning and Zoning Commission. And after the hearing, in an informal vote, the commission was unanimously opposed to changing the zoning for the Cardinal Health building. They cited the new Envision Dublin plan, which had just been adopted and is the community strategic plan effective August 1st. And the desire to keep that building commercial and for the tax value that goes along with having employees and generating employees there. At the end of that meeting, I asked Mr. Stark to pause our contracts that are going into the engineering process that would be required of us to change the code so it could be used for code. We have two really obstacles, or two things we'd need to overcome to use the Cardinal West campus for educational purposes. One is it would need to be zoned by the city of Dublin to be used as a school, and two, we'd have to get the code so it could be used as a school process. Planning and zoning was crystal clear that it's not their job to worry about taxpayer dollars. We pointed out that it would save 100 to 150 million for the Dublin taxpayers over building a 250,000 square foot building. Planning and zoning is pretty black and white. There's a process. If it doesn't meet the current code, they are very reluctant to give exceptions to that. One of the things that I found interesting was during the hearing, there was conversations that Envision Dublin has this corridor and it allows for the building to be an educational campus. Well, that includes colleges, universities, career technical. By the City of Dublin's definition, K-12 was excluded from educational campus when it came to this zoning. So we had a meeting with Cardinal today. We have not withdrawn from that purchase agreement yet. We're pressing pause. We're meeting with our partners at Cardinal and looking at the options. But it would be irresponsible of us to continue to spend money on engineering and evaluation if planning and zoning in a formal hearing clearly would say no. And I don't know if Mr. Stark wants to add anything. They weren't wishy-washy about their no. They were pretty straightforward. The process itself, planning and zoning, isn't who would deny the zoning change. That would have to go before City Council. But planning and zoning would recommend whether to approve a change in zoning. And historically in Dublin, City Council follows the recommendations of the Planning and Zoning Committee. So as we think about Cardinal West as an option, as we think about addition on Scioto, and keeping in mind that anything that we do, we would like to be able to do without going back to the taxpayers for additional money, because that was the #1 thing that came out of the Planning Next focus groups, was you guys do a great job, but stop raising our taxes. So as we have those conversations, we will regroup. I'll be meeting and talking with you as a board as we look at what are the options for us as we move forward. Even though we've hit this obstacle, I'm really grateful we did do the Planning Next work. I think the feedback we heard from them affirms some of the feedback that we've heard from other groups when it comes to taxes, when it comes to our community does understand we're growing. They clearly understand that we need more space. How we achieve that goal is going to be our challenge. We will still do the survey in the poll in September. The addition on Scioto has strong support. It was something that the community had supported in the past. Moving 500 students to Scioto and the redistricting process will be a bit of a challenge. But we know that, and we're not afraid of that challenge if that's the decision that we make moving forward. I think it's important, though, people have asked, what's the long-term solution? What's the end game? We're not in a position now financially to build something that solves the problem for the next decade. If by 2034 we have 2,000 more high school students, there's not a solution now that doesn't require more taxes that meets that. We could do a solution that takes a bite out of the apple now and leaves the community, if growth continues like it continues, it gives us the option to have more options down the road. So I think it's important to talk about, and just to be honest, with the resources we have now, we can create 500 additional seats without asking our taxpayers for additional money. That gets us to 2028, 2029. Then we'll tackle that when we get there. We also know that the U.S. economy is never a guarantee. And what we don't want to do is overbuild and overtax. So there may be some wisdom in incremental solutions to the problems that we're facing. So these are all things that we're working through, knowing that the addition that we put on Jerome High School will last us for another year or two, and then we start getting overcrowded again. We also know that when we cut the ribbon next year at Bishop Elementary School, we'll probably be at capacity when we cut the ribbon. That's just the type of growth that's taking place in our northwest quadrant. Any questions on these two things as I get going here?
Going back to the questions that we had previously just talked about, how do you, and I know we're going to get Mr. Fallon's input, but how do you foresee those questions now being shaped in light of this discussion or this latest part of the discussion?
Well, I think we walk a fine line because we can't ask, would you support a levy for a new high school? Because we can't use public dollars to see where people are with tax levies. So I think, one, we have to look community-wide to make sure there's an understanding at how fast we're growing. And then secondly, we need to look at what would the options be with the taxable authority that we have now that we can do without asking for additional funds. I don't see, and we haven't had this conversation, I would have a hard time recommending we go back on the ballot. So I think we have to look at the resources that we have, the bonded authority that we were granted in November 23, and look at what are the solutions that match that. I'm going to, if you, the next slide, get to, the fact that Jerome High School has a freshman class of, I think, 570 right now. And as we went through the fall athletic process, and one of our goals is to keep the experience in our building similar, we're cutting juniors and seniors from fall sports at Jerome when we don't field 3 teams at Scioto. And as Jerome gets to 22, 23, 2,400 students, and next year's freshman class will be over 600. So when you start getting to that size, it's not the same experience in a high school of 2,400 as it is in a school of 1,500. So as we look at solutions, Mr. Valentine, I think, and you've probably had this sitting in front of you for 20 years at different points, there's going to have to be a conversation about redistricting and trying to balance the size. It's just going to be here. The other thing, and I think we've all experienced this, there is a growing us versus them with the growth in the Northwest. It's uncontrolled. It's not the school district's fault. It's not the people who are moving there's fault. But there is a tension because the growth is happening so fast, which causes an economic crunch and a capacity crunch for us. As Dr. Schwanke and I talked today with our staff about redistricting, we know when we go to fill a new elementary school, not everyone's going to be pleased that they're getting redistricted to that new elementary school. But it's part of being in a growing district. And unity was one of the conversations that Sarah talked about. And I think historically, we've had one side of the river versus the other side of the river. Now we're throwing a component in that's Union County. That how do we create that Dublin identity as we move forward, and what does that look like? Does that help? Yeah. So those are 2 get-tos as we plan for working with the growth, maintaining unity, understanding those challenges. We are also, and thanks to Mike Ulring and our athletic directors, Chuck's been part of this conversation because we are launching a athletic handbook that aligns with our values that also has spectator information. In case anyone was wondering, you're not permitted to tailgate with alcohol at high school events. But unfortunately, it's happened. And unfortunately, when we have parents who show up with a little bit of courage because of what they've been consuming prior to a game, it leads to some bad spectator behavior. So one of the things that we're working with our staff and our SROs on is walking through the parking lots before the big events and making sure that we're not consuming in our parking lots, and having our parents in final form sign off on that they know the expectations for behavior at our athletic events. We had some situations in the spring where we had an entire official association say they would no longer officiate one of our school's games because of our parent behavior. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to continue to work with our parents, set clear expectations, and make sure that our behaviors align with the values that we have. And then our last get to on my slide today is we've got some road construction going on in the school district. Part of that's a challenge with growth. We had hoped that if a roundabout was started in the end of May, it would be done by the start of school, but it won't be. So our buses will have to traverse that Mitchell DeWitt Industrial Parkway roundabout for a couple weeks and take the detours until that's opened. And there are throughout the day different times that the O'Shaughnessy Reservoir, the project was supposed to be done at the end of July. Now they're saying October. So we don't have a lot of buses that go westbound over Glick Road during the day, but if we do, and if there are field trips and such, there are times that that's going to be closed. Apparently there was more structural damage to the turbines there at that reservoir than we had anticipated. So August and September, bus routes, always a bit of a challenge on the first couple days of school. We'll be working through the construction that's there.
I have a question before you move on. With the athletic handbooks and the spectator expectations, the athletic handbook is still a work in progress, correct?
Yes.
But the final forms spot where the parents need to sign off, that's already in there, correct?
That's correct, Tiffany. We wanted fall sports parents to have a look at it, so they sign off on it, and it was referenced at Meet the Coach nights, hopefully. But Mr. Ulring wanted to take it back and fine-tune it a little bit more, so we're hoping to have it finalized and print copies to parents soon. The timing was a little off, let's just say that out loud, and we'll get better going forward.
But the
Right,
expectations are there,
They're
and
the same,
parents should
yeah.
know. Please don't show up drunk at your high school students' game. Speaking of challenges with behavior, our enrollment center folks take a lot of abuse. We are seeing increasingly volatile and hostile parents when it comes to enrollment issues. Both folks trying to get into the Dublin City Schools, and we do have a private investigator who goes and checks if there's dishonesty in the process of people trying to claim residency within the Dublin City Schools. And in intra-district open enrollment, where parents may want their kid to go to a school that isn't where they live. Every March, per policy, we ask the board to adopt the enrollment caps based on the capacity at the buildings and the capacity resolution. Dr. Schwanke and I are talking about, as we get more crowded, just saying that there's no intra-district open enrollment, especially if we look at a potential path that balances the high schools more. The intra-district open enrollment creates an ongoing challenge because as schools hit that capacity, now they become closed. Some of our schools are closed at grade levels, but not others. I think we're close to the point at a district of this size to saying you go to school where you live. And we're going to have 15 elementaries, and you go to elementary where your house is. 5 middle, 3 high school. So just for the policy committee members, that may be coming as a recommendation. I'll take any conversations now in advance of that so that if anybody has any thoughts. We've also gotten some questions about why don't we take foreign exchange students anymore. One, most of our buildings are at or over capacity. There was also a time in suburban Columbus schools where foreign exchange students added to the culture in a pretty uniform, homogeneous suburban community. Dublin's changed a little bit in the last 30 years. Our diversity speaks for itself. And I'm not sure we're at a time where, one, we're overcrowded, period. Two, having students from another country, we've got lots of students who live here who come to us and move to Dublin. So in case you're asked, those are the two reasons. And our policy, and we changed it, I think, 2 years ago, where we don't accept foreign exchange students. But if anybody asks, that's why. Any thoughts, comments from any of the board members on any of that?
I just have one on the intra-district. That would be for any reason, correct? I mean, that is, if that's a policy that comes forward, that would just be a hard no. It's just not going to happen, whether it's academic or it's social-emotional, the answer would be no.
Yeah, right now in the state of Ohio, superintendents can create superintendent agreements. In my time in Central Ohio, and I'm starting year 12 in Central Ohio, I've granted 2 superintendent agreements, allowing a student to go to another district or come to our district. And it was in the case of heinous crimes where a student's life was in jeopardy that we would allow that, or something so traumatic happened in that student's life that they couldn't remain in their home school. But general social emotional, general note from a physician that, you know, they've been bullied at a school, so we want them to go to another school. No, that it would be a hard, fast line. We don't do that. And there would only be one person who could grant an exception, and that would be the superintendent. Okay. On a happier note, we're ready to roll. Thursday, we get to welcome the largest class ever in the Dublin City School District. And by the following Monday, it'll be the largest class ever in the Dublin City School District, because probably the first of every month, we could say that we're getting bigger and bigger. So we're excited. We're ready to go. And 2024-25 is here. Thank you all.
All right, I am excited to share with you this evening that we have launched our new website for the district. In case you wanted to count, there's 1,422 pages within our websites, because we have 25 of them, because we also have already started the process of creating a website for Bishop Elementary. And so I have been going through them for the past month and trying to get everything mapped and migrated the way it needs to be, and looking for errors and things like that. Still work in progress. We're still kind of going through and finding things. We do have a way in which people can report issues to us so that we can address them rather quickly. But for the most part, I think the major things that people need to utilize the website for are operational in there, and they're able to find them. Just a few highlights of features of this website that we're excited about. Staff directories are automated now, so they are synced with an import from our new HRMS system. And so as staff come and go, and as their titles change and things like that, it just automatically feeds the website and updates it, which is much more efficient for my team. And HR, because before we were having, in technology, before we were having to do a manual download out of a database and then manually upload each staff directory into the website. So that's no more, so we've gotten a little bit more efficient with that. Our staff are able to log in using Google Single Sign-On, so that's one less password and username that they have to remember. So they're excited about that. Our Google Calendars for all the buildings sync daily to the website to put events on the calendar, and families can subscribe to those calendars if they want to add those into their phone or their own personal calendars. And then we also have Find It Fast icons on the front page that each school is currently in the process of letting me know what they want there for their Find It Fast icons for families to be able to easily access the information and resources that they need. So we're very excited. I think it's clean, it's got a very modern look, and hopefully people will find it more user-friendly. And our survey data, when we conduct the survey with Paul Fallon in the spring, will show that there's been some major improvements. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
All right, there being nothing else, moving on to Treasurer's Office.
Yes, there is a few things on the agenda this evening. We have a purpose clause at Jerome for the new ethics club out there. We have some donations from our boosters of a coach's apparel to our over at Jerome. We have one appropriation change due to a grant received from Honda. And then our transfers. Our transfers, these are ones that you've seen every year. But just to go over them real quick, transfer 1 you may not have seen. Mr. Valentine has seen it, but the other 3 have not seen it because this is part of Admin Guideline 7510A, and we missed doing this the actual last 2 or 3, actually 3 years, and so we're doing that now and making that up currently with that. So that's due to Admin Guideline 7510A. Transfer number 2 is our transfer to our middle school athletics. I think Mr. Schwanke went 2 years ago. This is the 3rd year, okay. Where we've, instead of having the middle schools fundraise, which was becoming harder and harder and people overlapping themselves, and the inequities between the middle schools, decide to fund them evenly for each middle school to get the same amount of money. Third is our annual our general fund to our athletic funds at the middle school and high school. Primarily, this has been done, and this amounts that you see is something decided even prior to my time as Treasurer CFO in 2016. We haven't changed those amounts, but what these are for is to help out with safety supplies for our trainers and stuff, and also at the high school level, but also help out with pool fees as well when we swim at the Dublin Rec Center. And lastly, this is our general fund into our energy conservation sinking fund as part of some covenants of previously issued debt, and this was for energy conservation. So the theory being is when you do energy conservation measures, you use the savings that you get in the general fund on utilities to then pay back the debt that goes along with it. That is over a 15-year period, and as part of that, that requires us to make a sinking fund obligation every year of approximately $380,000. As the principal payment on this is essentially what I would refer to as a balloon payment. It's a one-time payment, and actually these notes or bonds mature next year of December 1 of 2025. Just to let you know, also these are issued through what was called Q-Scubies. Back during the Great Recession, as part of that, we actually get, it started out as 100% subsidy from the IRS on interest. It is now currently at 94.6 or something percent approximately. So most of the interest is then subsidized by essentially the federal government for these. So these will mature, like I said, next year in December 1st. So you'll be seeing this transfer one more time. Any questions?
All right, there being none, it is recommended by the Treasurer the Board of Education approve items 6B, 6C, 6D, 6E, 6F, 6G, and 6H. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. De Silva. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Mezek. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Messick,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 4-0. Department of Academics and Student Learning.
We have no report this evening, but on the agenda for your approval from the Department of Student Learning is a list of our physicians that work with our district, and you can see on there that the role that each one of them plays and the amount that they are paid. Any questions on those physicians? I think they're all returned, right, Chris? Yep. Okay, that's all for tonight.
All right. Scroll back up here. It's recommended by the superintendent, the Board of Education approve the district physicians for the 2024-2025 school year. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Rigby. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. De Silva. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Messick,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 4-0. Department of Operations.
Good evening. We only have one item for approval tonight, and that is a recommendation to approve a resolution allowing us to go on Meta's bid for buses. This doesn't obligate us to purchase any. It just allows us to join their bid. If there's any questions.
There being none, it's recommended by the superintendent, the Board of Education approve a resolution to receive cooperative bids with Meta Solutions for the purchase of school buses as needed. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Messick. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Rigby. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Messick,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
and Mr. Ballantyne.
Yes, motion passes 4-0. Human Resources.
Good evening, members of the board. I will start tonight with the certified agenda. And just going through the items, the first item you'll see is a recommendation for an administrative hire. Ms. Jonna Hetzel is being recommended as the assistant principal at Dublin-Scioto High School, filling the position that was held by Rita Schaefer, who became principal at Eversole Run Middle School. We have our first certified retirement for next school year, Jody Cooper. She'll retire with 22 years in Dublin. And then the resignation that's on is not a new resignation, but was left off an earlier agenda. So this was an individual that we had notice about a few months back. The certified hires are the remainder of the staff who are being recommended for this school year. And good news, we are staffed at 100% in all of our buildings. Special thanks to Mrs. O'Connor. She and I had the opportunity last Wednesday to welcome a class of 52 new teachers to Dublin City Schools, and very excited for them starting. The next items are recommendations for substitutes in our related services area. They provide key support in areas that we cannot staff through our regular route of utilizing available subs through the ESC. So they're on the agenda tonight. The next several items, they're all related to getting our buildings ready for the start of a new school year. So you'll see several 6-period pay requests or changes, extended time for our related services employees to complete work that falls outside the normal school year, and then those supplemental contracts that are for athletics and academics that will take place this coming school year. Moving on to our classified agenda, lots of activities. There's 10 resignations and 17 new hires, and those are things that have happened since our last board meeting. And then our buildings and departments have been working to make sure that our support staff positions, they're staffed for the new school year, which again is one of the reasons for such a large number of employment actions. The final item are 2 stipends that are on tonight's agenda. And again, the first was, again, an omission of a staff member for Hope Squad that they actually did last school year, and it's on tonight to make sure that that staff member is paid. The second is for new teacher orientation and then paying those newly hired certified staff who attended last week prior to the start of the school year. And then that concludes the HR portion of tonight's agenda.
Any follow-up questions from members of the board? All right, there being none, it's recommended by the superintendent, the Board of Education, approve items 12A, 12B, and 12C. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. De Silva. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Rigby. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. Messick,
Yes.
and Mr. Ballantyne.
Yes, motion passes 4-0. Items for board discussion or future agenda items?
I just had one question about the timing of our upcoming board meetings. Are we making the switch to 6 p.m. going forward?
Does anyone object?
No.
Okay, we were originally scheduled for 6 p.m. for the second meeting, so Mr. Kern, if we can, the business meetings in September through December, and then we can if we could move those to 6, that'd be great.
Yes, we can do that, and we'll get the public notices out as we're required to.
Thank you, Mrs. Rigby.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. De Silva. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Rigby. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. Motion passes 4-0. We are adjourned.